perhaps we get over-involved in management. And the net effect of that, they tell me, is that inevitably, because policymaking and accountability are always required, and we don't spend as much time as we'd like on formulating strategy. The more thoughtful company chairmen with whom I've worked over the years say, well, I recognise that problem. And I have decided that we must put some effort to redress the situation. We can't make the short-term executive action problems go away, but I can ensure, this is the chairman talking now, that my board devotes sufficient time to strategy, perhaps by having specific strategy for formulating board meetings, or indeed taking my board away for a weekend to focus on strategy. Just notice that the right-hand side of that diagram, strategy and policy, focusing forward, is fundamentally different from the left-hand side, focusing on supervision and accountability. As I just said, on the right-hand side, the board is concerned with performance. On the left-hand side, it's concerned with conformance. And if you just cast your minds back to the definitions from Cadbury, the OECD, Bob Monk's, that I drew your attention to earlier in this lecture, all of them have this duality in the boardroom, in the definition of corporate governance. On the one hand, a concern for performance, on the other hand, a concern for conformance. And the challenge to the chairman of the board is obviously to ensure that appropriate time and attention is devoted both to the performance and the conformance elements of the board's work. The 2x2 matrix that I've just been showing you had a very interesting addition put on by Fred Hilmer, who wrote the first Australian corporate governance report. He said, yes, the 4 quadrants do broadly capture the work of the board, but the board has to work with, indeed it first of all has to approve the appointment, but it has to work with and through the Chief Executive Officer. CEO is at the top of the triangle, typically a member of the board circle, but the board have got to work through him to get the management activity. So he put in the middle of the 2x2 matrix the additional box to approve and work with and through the Chief Executive Officer. And notice the subtlety of this additional box is that it can be very small, in which case the board are putting a lot of effort into strategy, policy, supervising and accountability, or it can really be, the middle box can really be expanded and become quite large, in which case the board is saying, we are delegating to you, Chief Executive Officer or a Managing Director, a lot of the responsibility for running the business. It's an opportunity, an option that is available to the board themselves. While we're passing, let me just tell you an interesting story about Fred Hilmer's report. He gave it the unusual title, Forever Boardroom. Why? Well, those of you who are film buffs will know of the film Forever Ballroom. The film Forever Ballroom is about classical dance competitions in which the beautifully sequined ladies and the beautifully elegantly attired black-tied gentlemen move around the ballroom gracefully to a pattern which the judges insist is always the same. The problem with that and the story of the film Forever Ballroom is that a very forward-looking, dynamic team of dancers realized that by the judges insisting on these rules, there was no innovation, no creativity in ballroom dancing. And the story of the film, of course, is that of the couple who break out. Fred Hilmer says, and in business it's just the same. The more we emphasize the rules and the regulation, the more corporate governance through the codes insists on compliance and conformance, the greater the potential to damp out innovation, entrepreneurial flair, and creativity. Hence he called his book, his report on corporate governance in Australia, Forever Boardroom, making the point, and indeed the only of the corporate governance reports to make this point, that corporate governance is not just about compliance with rules, regulations and principles, but it's balancing conformance on the one hand with performance on the other. Well, I've already discussed with you how boards should spend their time. Let me just put the 2x2 matrix back again and invite you, when the lecture is over, to think about this in the context of an organisation with which you're familiar. Your own company, limited liability company, your university, a committee on which you serve. Two questions, I remind you. How should boards, governing bodies, spend their time? And in your experience, your belief, how do they spend their time? It's quite an interesting exercise to do. And I'd like to conclude this lecture with a few thoughts on my experience of working with company chairmen who have said, in a sense, I recognise the challenge of balancing the board's time. I know inevitably we don't spend enough time, we don't focus sufficiently on longer-term corporate strategy. Let's take my board away for a weekend. Or let's devote a specific board afternoon, a board meeting, to a strategy seminar or a workshop. I've done this over the years, and a number of pointers have come out to how to make this a success. Careful planning well in advance is absolutely essential. All the directors need to be fully informed about the objectives, what the chairman wants to achieve in the strategy seminar, and all directors need to be supportive. If even one director doesn't think it's a good idea, is not committed to taking a realistic strategic view of where the business is, where the competitors are, what its goals are, and where it wants to be in the future, that one director can become a very disruptive force in the meeting. What you don't want is any individual saying, we've tried that before and it won't work. We discussed this in a board meeting some time ago and we decided not to do it. What you need from all the directors is a commitment to not making decisions per se, but thinking realistically, strategically about where the organisation is going. Agree a time when everybody can attend well in advance, and fix a location. I'm a strong believer that strategy workshops, strategic discussions should not take place in the boardroom. Why? Well, because board discussions tend to follow a particular culture. Boards develop their own culture, they develop their own style. And they're very much orientated toward taking decisions. Whereas in a strategic review, a strategy seminar, when you're inviting the directors to think ahead, to consider alternatives, to think strategically, which means getting inside the head of the competitors and the potential competitors and thinking what strategies they're following. To do that, you don't need to be, it doesn't help to be decision orientated. Think through alternatives in the strategy seminar, evaluate them, and only subsequently come back to the boardroom with a paper and a proposal for a strategic direction.